We have prepared a jam-packed agenda, as Antonio mentioned earlier, for you. So let's get started with the first panel of the forum. We will be opening today with personal experiences of asset allocator trustees panel. Joining us on the panel, we have pension fund trustees who will discuss their personal experiences in being effective trustees and share methods to accomplish strategic initiatives. Moderating the panel, we have Ruiz Elizondo Thompson, CEO of a private family office. Thank you for joining us. Luis, this is your turn, so take it away.
Thank you so much. It's so exciting to be kicking off such a great day with such a fun and interesting panel, which I've gotten to know these folks over the last few weeks here, and we have a lot of good stories to share with you and insights about what it's like to serve in these roles. So let's just start with first introductions. Cynthia Ruiz, professor, best-selling author, currently serves as a commission president for Los Angeles City Employee Retirement System. She's been 6 years as a trustee, ran public works. She's a Latina and a Native American, a true trailblazer, and we're going to get more into that in just a minute. I also want to introduce Henry Jones, a retiree. He obviously serves on the CalPERS board right now of administration. This is his second one-year term as president. He retired in 1998 from the Los Angeles Unified School District as CFO, and he has an incredible trajectory over his career, starting from custodian and finishing as CFO of that second largest school district in the country. We're going to get more into that and how that fits in with his service in just a minute as well. And then last, I want to introduce Ophelia Vascal. So she currently serves as a consultant to UC Berkeley and senior executive at Inclusion Inc. She serves on the Alameda County, California Employee Retirement Association and has an incredible story to share with us about how she got involved in that type of service. Previously served in the Obama administration as well. Ophelia, I want to give the first question to you because you have such an interesting story about how you ended up serving on the Alameda board. Can you please give us a little detail and give us the 2-3 minute version of looking over that statement and what happened next?
Sure. So I was this was probably 20 plus years ago. I was an employee of Alameda County, and at the end of the calendar year, you get your retirement statement, and I looked at it. And I don't know why I decided to just make sure that it matched up with what my contributions I thought they were, and it didn't. And so I asked my CFO to take a look, and she said nope. And we checked a couple of other statements, and they didn't seem to be correct. And so I went in and asked to meet with the CEO. And I have to, in fairness to them, they were in the midst of a major upgrade to their computer system. And he sort of said, well, it really doesn't matter if the statement's not right, because what really counts is the last 3 years of your service, and you're not going to be retiring anytime soon. And I was like, no, it does matter, because it's important that the statements are accurate, because actuarial, reports and a number of things are dependent on this info. And I just kind of felt like I got a bit of a brush off. And so I went to the board and I said, if you don't want me to run for one of these open seats, somebody needs to pay attention to this. And the Board of Supervisors was impressed enough, I guess, with my persistence about this, that I actually was appointed to the board. And so I've been serving ever since.
So you were being a fiduciary even before you officially had the role.
That's correct. I guess you could look at it that way, yes.
And tell us, what has surprised you so far about your service that you perhaps weren't expecting and that wasn't in the job description per se?
Well, I think probably what's been most interesting to me is to really see how the board can drive change and initiatives at the pension fund. Pensions are very complicated, and the people who serve on these boards, for the most part, are not financial experts. And so there can be I won't say timidness, but I think a little bit of people step back and let staff sort of direct, and consultants. And, I've seen over time the board recognizing, no, our fiduciary responsibility here is not only the financial aspects of the fund, but also, what kinds of policies do we want to have? How do we want to make sure that we're serving the members well? And so I would say that, I've seen the board become much more assertive about its role in policy development and ensuring that we're delivering the proper services and results for our members.
That's great. Thank you. Henry, I want to ask a similar question to you, but first I'd love to hear, and I'm sure the audience would love to hear a little bit about your trajectory, again, as I mentioned in the introduction, from custodian to CFO, and then getting pulled out of retirement into service for CalPERS. Tell us a little bit about that and what your service has been like so far and different from what you expected.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ruiz, for the question, and thank you, the organization, for inviting me to participate in this panel. Well, first of all, as you asked, in terms of my career at Los Angeles Unified School District, I graduated from high school in Galveston, Texas, and us, 6 of us in 2 cars drove to Los Angeles looking for a better life, and started working as a custodian at Los Angeles Unified School District as a high school graduate. And I was encouraged by others to go to college. You should be looking toward the future. So with that encouragement, I enrolled in college, and then took promotional exams, continued to do my undergrad work and post-grad work while I worked through the system and promoted through the system. And 38 years later, I was retired as the chief financial officer. So it was a very rewarding run, I should say. And then I left there and started working for PricewaterhouseCoopers. Did that for a few years and then retired. And then to answer the question about why did I join the board, I think it was a personal experience that opened my eyes to the importance of retirement and healthcare security. My wife battled with illness that made me think about the cost of healthcare and the importance of having that kind of security, because without it, the financial cost for her care would have been overwhelming. And so I also had the financial background as a CFO for Los Angeles Unified School District, and was encouraged to run for the open seat on the CalPERS board representing retirees. The board is made up of 13 members. 6 of us are elected by different constituent groups. 3 are appointed. 2 of those are appointed by the governor and 1 appointed by the legislature, and 4 are ex officio members, 2 of which are the state controller and the state treasurer. And so finally, the mission of CalPERS was an important factor. I wanted to ensure that other public servants would have the same security as me. And it really was rewarding to know that I had that kind of protection, not only during the health care crisis with my wife, but also in retirement. And so what did I expect when I joined the board? I understood the financial side of the work and had faced many financial challenges over the years at Los Angeles Unified School District. And also, as a result of my time at PricewaterhouseCoopers, I also had a realistic perspective about national financial challenges. But yet, I was surprised by the global reach and influence of CalPERS and the amount of public scrutiny that came with this position. CalPERS is one of the world's largest pension systems with a fund value of $464 billion as of June 1st. When we pay out $26 billion in pension benefits on behalf of the 2,900 employers who contract with us. And people don't realize, but we also spend $9 billion a year in health benefits for 1.5 million members. And that they're represented by nearly 1,200 contracting employers. So it's been a 12, I'm going on my 4th term as being elected. I'm elected every 4 years, and it's a statewide campaign. That's another thing I did not realize. By being elected, you have to run a statewide campaign because it's you're elected by all members. And being elected by retirees, my constituent group is 600,000 retirees, And they live in California, they live in Hawaii, they live in Florida, they live in Arizona, and they live out of the country. And all of them get a chance to vote. So your constituent base, you have to make sure you communicating with them, because every 4 years they're going to determine whether or not they want me to represent them on the CalPERS board.
Well, that's a good, thank you, Henry. That's a good segue. You've been a part of the CalPERS board for a long time now, and had an interesting evolution there. And that's actually similar to Cynthia. Cynthia, you now currently serve as president, but you didn't start as president. Can you tell us a little bit about your trajectory and your evolution into that role that you're currently sitting in, and sort of what you've learned along the way that some of our audience might be interested in?
Oh, well, yes. Thank you, Luis. And first of all, I just have to say that I am really excited to be here today. And I want to thank HHF for all the great work that they do. You know, anybody that's in the financial field, which we all are, realize that the number of Latinos, Latinas, and people of color and women, we're a very small minority when it comes to the financial landscape. So it's so important to have these kind of conversations so people can connect and get to know each other. So I just want to give a shout out to Emmanuel Eman. I've known him many, many years. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today. So as you indicated, Luis, I am president of the City of Los Angeles Employees Retirement System, LACERS, and we are a smaller public pension fund. And when I say smaller, we're still $22 billion worth of assets. And we are a 7 board. We have 7 members on our board. 4 of them are appointed by the mayor of the City of Los Angeles, and 3 of them are elected. We serve 5-year terms. So my term is going to continue until June 30th of 2024. So I've currently been on the board almost 6 years now. And when I have been a city commissioner in the past, I was president of Public Works. I've been an executive. My degree is actually in counseling. I don't have a financial background, but when the mayor of the City of Los Angeles calls you to service, you say yes. So I accepted the appointment, and then I said, oh my God, what did I just get myself into? So I take everything very seriously that I do. I always try to do my best. So it was a learning curve. It's like, okay, I'm going to sit on the pension board, and I'm not a financial expert, but I do have strategic planning experience. I've run large organizations. I have the skill set, except I don't know finances. I mean, up until that point, the only thing I really did was balance my own checkbook. But I said, I'm going to learn. So it has been a learning process. So when you are a trustee, it's your responsibility to learn as much as you can. Now, based on my experience, when an elected official appoints someone to a public pension board, it's usually for 1 or 2 reasons. One is because they trust that person. And with Mayor Garcetti, and thank you, Mayor Garcetti, for appointing me, he had trust in me because we had worked together before. So either the elected official trusts that person because overseeing $22 billion is a big responsibility, or the other factor that I've seen is to represent a constituency. For example, maybe the mayor wants to have a labor representative or a community representative. So those are the 2 reasons that I've seen people become political appointees. But once you take on that role, and again, as trustees, this is a non-paid position. This is part of my civic duty. And once I became president, it's very time consuming. But I take everything very seriously. And I said, I'm going to be the best president of LACERS that I can be. I'm the first Latina Native American to hold this position. In my career, I've been a trailblazer in many of my positions. And when you're a trailblazer, it's actually comes with a lot of responsibility. You know, people, when you're the first one in the door, you really have to represent. And when you're in a public pension fund, there's a lot of openness and transparency. And you have to make sure that you're on your best behavior all the time. And then in public pension funds, we have a lot of ethic laws that we have to abide by. So to me, the way I look at my role is I feel like it's my way of giving back to the city of Los Angeles and being of service. And it's an honor to serve.
I want to ask you about something that you mentioned to me a few weeks ago, to elaborate on this point, which is you talked about sort of in this new role as president, sort of the obligation and sort of the commitment you have to sort of a longer term vision, and the importance of that. Can you just sort of share with our audience what you meant by that when you shared that with me last week?
Absolutely. And so the way I look at my role as a trustee, a fiduciary, we're really looking at a long-term horizon. We're really looking at 30 years of investment. I believe that the two most important things you can do as a trustee is, first of all, the asset allocation. With $22 billion, what we do is we decide our buckets, how much is going to go to private equity, how much is to real estate. So every few years we reevaluate that. So setting our asset allocations is probably the most important thing we do. The second thing the important thing that we do is set our return on investment. So as a fiduciary, those are probably the most important things we do, and both of those have a long 30-year horizon. In addition to that, trustees and come and go. So you have to figure out, we're not there to micromanage our staff. We're there to set policy and be visionaries. So for me, I decided what is important to me. So my two passions are ESG, environment, social responsibility and governance, and diversity. So in addition to my fiduciary responsibility, I take on my two passions with that lens, and how can I incorporate that in our pension system? So what I did is I actually introduced our ESG policies. We became a member of PRI, Principles for Responsible Investment, which is a global organization. And then in collaboration with one of my other trustees, we really pushed the agenda of emerging managers and providing more opportunities for people of color, for women to have some of the, manage some of the dollars that we have. So that's the, big picture of the trustee. And then I think every trustee should figure out what's important to them in the confines of the pension world.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that last point, Cynthia. And I want to ask this question of all of our panelists, and Ophelia, I want to give you a chance to answer next, which is, how do you think about identifying, supporting, and bringing on new emerging managers from underrepresented communities and constituencies? I'm sorry, Ophelia, we can't hear you. I think
yep, I'm muted. There we go. Wouldn't be a Zoom call if you didn't have to tell someone to unmute themselves, right? So I think that forums like this are really important. One, because they introduce you to people that you can introduce to whatever your process is. We have a very specific process at Alameda where we have time set up each month for emerging managers to meet with our consultants and our CIO and staff. And, it gives us an introduction to firms we may not be familiar with. So I think it's really critical that people know about that, for example, the board members' availabilities. We meet people at conferences and forums like this who say, gee, how can I learn more about your emerging manager program? And I think it's also important to speak about this and to be involved in letting people know that this is not just, we want to do the socially correct thing. No, this is about, we know that we get better views, we get more input from having a diversity of asset managers. And, we've seen, there are studies now that show the effectiveness of emerging managers with returns. So I think we can also be ambassadors for the concept and ensure that we're seeing it play out, appropriately in our own funds and also in the industry in general.
Excellent. Thank you, Ophelia. Same question for you, Henry. How are you all doing this at CalPERS How are you thinking about it? How are you implementing it?
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to just echo Cynthia's comments about the role of the a board. You know, the powers that we have that really fall into four areas. Is we conduct the board. We conduct, we set, we approve, and we oversee. Those are the main broad areas that we are responsible for. That how we accomplish those goals is another story by delegation through various policies, statements, and through long-term and sustainability engagements, et cetera. And so on the other thought about first of all, let me just comment kind of broadly on this whole role of how we address inequality before I specifically talk about the emerging managers. Through our diversity and inclusion, both an internal and external, it's both an internal and an external focus. These policies are contained within our investment beliefs that we established back in 2013. We had several meetings and sessions to come up with 10 investment beliefs that would guide our decision making as we move forward. Because also, like Cynthia said, that we're a long-term investor. We had to look at new employees coming in at age 20 and working 30, 40 years and retiring and living for another 30 years. So we have to look at 50, 60 years in the future in terms of being sure that the benefits for our members are there when they retire and live through their lives. And so one of the key beliefs that long-term value creation requires the effective management of three forms of capital: financial, physical, and human. And we're also guided by our strategic plan on sustainable investment approved by the board in 2016 that outlines our approach to corporate engagement on board diversity, advocacy with regulators, and integration into our investment process. And so we were the leaders in the emerging manager program long before I was elected to the board. The CalPERS had established an emerging manager program, and to this day, we continue to have emerging manager programs, and we have them in three categories. We have them in the global equity, we have them in the private equity, and we also have them in real estate. And we just recently commissioned what we call a transitional program. And because the criteria that was identified as an emerging manager, that you had to have assets under management less than $1 billion. So what has happened recently and several years ago is that we start off allocating to a small firm and they grow, and then eventually they have assets under management exceeding $1 billion, and then they no longer were considered an emerging manager, so they left the allocation process. So what we've done is created this transitional program, so those that are successful starting off small and grow to be large investors, we can retain those types of firms and going forward, so that we don't lose the opportunity to share in their growth and also the returns that are so necessary. And just finally, back to the role of the board, I also concur about there's three really important roles. I think the most important role of a board is to determine that asset liability management process, to determine how we're going to allocate our funds and what risks we're going to take. And matter of fact, we review our asset liability management process every 4 years. And matter of fact, this year we start with the review of capital market assumptions, and then we bring in experts to talk about their view of the future from an investment perspective. And so we're just in the middle of that process now. And matter of fact, at our July offsite, we'll have a full discussion about these issues related to asset management liability process. And then we will make a decision about that asset allocation sometime during the next count this coming year. And then we would implement, and then we do that early enough because those decisions then flow over to the agencies that part of our system, because that would affect the contribution rate that they have to pay into the system for their employees. So we try to make sure that we make those decisions that not only looking at the investment returns, but also factoring in what's the impact on the local agency that's going to have to provide maybe an increase in their contributions to fund the investment that we make. So it's a major big role that a board of trustees have. And then the second most important is hiring a CEO, because we delegate most of this work to a CEO, and that person manages the operation of the entire fund. So that's a critical role the board plays, is to hire the CEO. And just recently, the board made a policy change in terms of hiring the CIO. We're now going to, whereas previously it was the role of the CEO to hire the CIO, but recently we changed that policy. So it would be a shared role to hire the CIO in addition to the CEO going forward. So those are some of the things that I could share on that particular question.
Thanks for sharing that, Henry. Cynthia, thank you for getting us on this subject. I want to sort of dig even a little bit deeper with you, and I want to ask this question of all the panelists, but let's start with you, Cynthia. When you're evaluating asset managers, it sounds like all of your systems have a specific process and a pathway, and even more specifically for emerging managers. But tell us, what might be the unspoken things that aren't on paper somewhere that you're looking for when you're evaluating asset managers?
Well, thank you for that question, because I really want to give a message to the investors out there. Is I know when I go to a lot of conferences pre-COVID, we were in person, a lot of the management firms and investors wanted to chase me down, have lunch and dinner. Well, it doesn't really make sense to me to do that for two reasons. First of all, it's a public pension fund, so I have gift limits, so I can't accept lunches and dinners and that type of thing. And the second thing is because we have a process. Everything is a process. So the way we do it is we release requests for proposals, and then through the request for proposal RFP process, whether we're looking for private equity managers or real estate managers, we have a general consultant that we gets a lot of it has a lot of credibility, and we listen to a lot. But then based on asset classes, we have sub-managers. So everything is a process. So it doesn't do you any good to come to me and try to get me to invest in your particular fund for you want 10 million, 100 million, whatever it is. You have to learn the process. And through the request for proposal process, then what happens is that's initially vetted by staff. And then we have a subcommittee of our board, of the investment committee. It goes through the investment committee, and then it comes to the board. So learning the process, getting on our mailing list for notifications of the different RFPs that go out is really, really important. But I want to go back a little bit, because we were talking about emerging managers and diversity. One thing that I've learned is change takes a long time. So as a trustee, the most important thing I can do, in addition to what I've already talked about, is setting the policy. And policy takes time, because I want the policy to be there after I leave. In the city of Los Angeles, we have a whole group of city employees that call themselves weebies. We be here before you, and we be here after you. And so they realize that the people at the top change. And so it's really, once you set the policy in place, and they have to follow that policy. So for me, it's about learning how to work within our system. And for the external people, the managers of investment, it's also learning how to work with our system and know our process, because everything we do is public, transparent. There's accountability. We have ethics laws that we have to abide by. So, again, it's a system, and it really benefits everybody if people become familiar with how to play the system, not to play the system, but to work within the system.
Excellent. Thank you. Ophelia, same question to you. Anything that doesn't appear on the paper, but you think might be important criteria or influences or helps facilitate a particular manager's ability to be hired?
So, I mean, we use an investment consultant to really, we're monitoring our asset allocation at all times. We're monitoring performance at all times. So we're identifying areas where we may want to increase the allocation, or we may put somebody on a watch list or decide to replace a certain manager. So, that information is all public. And, if you're interested in working with Alameda, it's good. The agendas are public. It's something you can watch. It makes sense to get to know our consultant. And I also would just say that, like Cynthia, we have a process, but, I have no problem introducing somebody to our investment consultant or our CIO if they want to learn more about specifics or whatever. But, I would say in the selection process, we always have an in-person interview when people have made it through the screen and we're at the point of making a decision whether we'll be selecting a firm or not. And I would just urge people that really, I think the diversity and inclusion piece can be very frustrating at times for board members who are hearing from various asset managers who are in presenting. They give you their materials and they know they probably need to say something about diversity and inclusion, but I really appreciate honesty. I don't, it's very hard for me to have somebody when you're looking at there's no diversity in their upper management, and then they'll say, well, it's really hard to get people because, everybody who went to Harvard wants to work somewhere else. And so you have to say to them, maybe you ought to be having a wider screen than just people who went to Harvard. So, I think that people need to be, particularly when they speak to diversity and inclusion, to be honest about what's happening in their firm, to be thoughtful about how they're presenting that information, because it is looked at and we do talk about it. So that's one thing that's not, I would say laid out, but I've been through enough presentations where I just want to say to people, it's okay, just be honest and tell us what you're going to try to do to address the fact you have no diversity in your firm.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for that insight. Henry, you want to add anything on this front?
Yeah, I'd like to add a thought on that. The particular since CalPERS, as I mentioned, started an emerging management program years ago, and because of the limitations in the state of California, proposition that passed that prevents us from asking for racial or ethnic data on firms, et cetera. So when we created the emerging management program to try to still drive that focus as to what the ultimate goal was going to be, we used size as a criteria for the emerging management program. In other words, you have to be a first or second or third fund, or you otherwise you would not be eligible for this emerging management program, because we realized that most of the new funds, the first, second, or third fund component managers rather, were either women-owned or minority-owned firms. So we were achieving the goal, even though we had this limitation. And so the other thing that occurred, some of our audience may remember the placement agent situation in California some years ago, and legislation was passed. And the placement agents, if you knew someone who had insights or relationship with a board, you got an opportunity to sell your case. And so I was concerned about that being the process where, based on who you know, you're able to have an opportunity to present your case. So we created this investment proposal reporting system, so that now all of the requests, the proposals, anyone can log on to CalPERS website and I go to an investment proposal tracking system and submit their proposal online. And they all will be reviewed in the same manner, so that, number one is seeing whether or not that investment strategy is consistent with, our real estate or with our private equity or with our global equity strategies, number one. and so that it can be evaluated further. But if it's not part of the strategies that we look for, then that firm is notified that this is not consistent with the strategy. The other thing that opportunity for emerging managers is that we have in our global equity, we have an advisor that manages the emerging manager program. And in the private equity, we have what we call a fund of funds manager that the firms can contact and go to have their proposals evaluated. And then in real estate, we have what we call a mentoring manager. So in those three areas where we have emerging managers, we have a process where a firm can go to those locations and identify their plan or their proposal and have them evaluate. Because CalPERS years ago used to do all that themselves, and the volume was just too much for us, the staff, our investment staff, to deal with the number of requests that were coming in. So we created these three strategies, these business models, if you will, to make sure that the emerging managers had access to CalPERS capital through the vehicles that I just described, so that they could have an opportunity to present their case, and if it's evaluated and it's consistent with our strategies, then it could be receive an allocation. So I agree that because of the limitations again, but we do ask the makeup of and the board doesn't review those. Those are all we have almost 250 professional investment staff. Those are and the three partners that I mentioned for the three asset classes. They do all of the work and they make the decisions, but the board set the policy about what we are going to do. We want to expand our emerging manager program, or we want to focus on changing, like doing the real estate. We want to now focus on opportunistic and value add or commercial real estate rather than changing environments all over the world. So it's a process that's very fluid, and we believe that it's working fine. And the board, we do get reports on the programs. And matter of fact, every month the investment committee receives a report on all of our asset classes, including the emerging manager program. And that does come to our investment committee. Our investment committee is a committee of the whole. We went through a transition where it was a committee of the whole, and then we decided to try limiting it to 9 members. And we did that for a year, and then the board felt that it was better to have it a committee of the whole. So we returned to a committee of the whole this year. So that means that when those recommendations come to the investment committee, they are final. They don't have to come to the board. It's just a report to the board, but it's not coming to the full board for board action, because all 12 members are sitting on the investment committee and they make those decisions, and they're final at that point in time.
Thank you for that, Henry. We're running out of time, so I want to make sure that we get a chance to ask some questions from our audience members. And one of the questions I have here from Mario is an interesting sort of nuanced question about, and I'll just read it to you here. It says, how do you view your diversity initiatives in terms of working with non-emerging managers to promote diversity within their organizations, particularly in roles that touch and directly impact your program? Ophelia, do you want to tackle that first?
Yeah, I sort of alluded to that. I mean, and Henry makes a good point about the laws in California and what you can ask about and what you can't. But we have, as part of our ESG policy, we like to see the firm makeup when people present to us. And so just the fact that you're asking raises the importance of it, I think, and helps asset managers understand that we're really looking to see what you're doing, what kinds of programs you're participating in to increase diversity in your staff. And that we mean whether that's women or, people of color. And as I said, it's interesting how firms who don't have diversity try to scramble to, sort of say it's not really our fault. We try really hard, but if you didn't go, if you went to Harvard, maybe you go to another firm. And so, we've talked about looking more broadly outside of the Ivy League schools, and we look to people who we inform them programs where we know that people are working on this issue. So those are some of the things that we do to try to encourage people in the field to be thinking more broadly about how to increase diversity in their own staffs.
Cynthia, do you want to touch on that one as well?
Yes, and first of all, I want to echo what both of the previous speakers have said, but in California, we can't mandate diversity, but we could sure talk about it. Not only in these forums, but when I'm out there in the general financial world, I'm always talking about diversity. And so they get it that it's important to me. And we even actually kind of went sideways with our city attorney last year, because when we were putting out the request for proposals, we were asking for the composition of the companies as they were submitting. We wanted to know the gender diversity, ethnic diversity, and our city attorney says, no, you can't ask those questions. And we were like, well, why not? So what the city attorney told us, well, you can ask those questions as long as you don't use that data to make your decision. So, but we find that just like Ophelia said, just by asking the question, people get it. People understand that diversity is important to us. And I think that the more we start having that conversation, and we're seeing the conversation go global with ESG in the governance piece, because today it's very normal to hear the conversation about diversity on corporate boards. So I think the more that we have that conversation, the more important it is. And what the reality is that change takes time, but if we don't do something about it when we are in positions of power, then shame on us. So I think continue having that conversation, talk about it, and we will get there in terms of having more diversity in all levels.
So thank you, Cynthia. I want to switch subjects here a little bit and talk about more of your sort of personal experiences on the board and perhaps some of the unexpected challenges that you faced in these roles. Henry, I want to start with you on that question. Give us one example, maybe two, if you have two small ones, of unexpected challenges you faced in your role as a board member, and then obviously as president as well.
Well, I think that one of the most recent ones is that the COVID-19 was I think it blindsided everyone, of course. And so we had to, pull out our emergency plans and make decisions about how to continue to provide benefits to 2 million members that we provide service for. And so that was a very in-depth strategic process that we went through. But it just goes to show you the resilience of having a qualified staff that you're able to rebound and continue to provide the services to, in our case, 2 million members. And matter of fact, some of the responses we're getting is that the services slightly improved. And now many of our members want to continue to work remotely because about 80% of our staff was working remotely, and we have about around 3,000 employees at CalPERS, and so about 80% of them were working remotely, and so but the service continued without a break in the benefits that were being provided to our members. The other big thing, as I mentioned, one of the biggest issues is the hiring of a CIO, and that was an unexpected challenge that in the middle of last year, our CEO resigned, and for various reasons that we won't go into here. But then that left us with the vacancy, and the board had to take steps right away. And as I mentioned in my opening comments, the public scrutiny that we are under, and everyone had their own opinion, while why the CIO left, and so every board meeting you get the comments and about what they believe or public members believe that the reason for that departure, and it just continues to. It requires managing reputation. And so that's important, because if your reputation is damaged on those, and then we're in the global marketplace and we're relying on our reputation to make sure that we get the best type of investment all over the world, because 50% of our assets at $460+ billion is invested outside of the United States. So our reputation is important. And so we had to manage that process to be sure that the reputation was not, and more importantly, is set the process in motion to then hire a new CIO. So those are two more recent issues that we had that were publicly involved in terms of the board's actions, and another area that sometimes we get disagreement among board members, and that's a public forum also. So we have to make sure we manage that properly, so that our reputation is not tarnished. So those are a couple that come to mind right away.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Cynthia, same question for you.
So a couple of things, just like Henry talked about, COVID had hit everybody really hard. And one of the biggest challenges for Lacers was to pivot, mostly for the employees, because city employees were not used to working remotely. So that was a challenge. So we worked with our executive team and got through that. Yeah, but I have to say, one of my surprises has been our lease was up where our executive offices are. And so the board, and with my leadership, decided to make a strategic decision, and instead of continue leasing, buy a building. To me, that was a no-brainer. I mean, if you're a renter, wouldn't you rather buy a home than rent? But I got challenged by some of my fellow trustees. They didn't necessarily think that was a good idea, which surprised me. Well, we did buy a building, and we're in the process of making some renovations, and it will move forward and we'll move in by the end of this year. But I was surprised by the lack of support that I received from my fellow trustees. But I have to say, for me, what's always in the back of my mind, I mean, we all know that the financial world has ebbs and flows. And right now, the 22 billion is a watermark high for us. I just don't want to be president if the market crashes and we're at the lowest. So that kind of always is like in the back of my mind, the general landscape of the financial world. So I'm hoping that it stays good through the rest of my term.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you for that. Ophelia, do you want to tackle that?
I'm mindful of the time. I know that we're due to wrap up here in a second. I would just say that I think there's the tension between representing constituencies that Henry spoke to, or whether it's different groups or whatever. But at the end of the day, your responsibility is to the fund overall. And sometimes it's hard to turn down a constituent who makes a compelling case for their constituency, but just runs counter to where you need to be in terms of the overall fund.
Thank you. That's an excellent point. Thank you for that. So we are almost out of time here. So I want to give each of you, our panelists, an opportunity, 1 minute each, no more than that. And just, is there any one last thing that you would like to share with our audience, keeping in mind that we've got a lot of asset managers on Zoom with us today, something that maybe you haven't had a chance to speak to yet, given the questions that we've had or where the conversation's taken us? Henry, we'll kick it off with you.
Yeah, I think I think they have to stay the course, because as a investment manager, you come in, you make a proposal that's not consistent with our current strategy today. Doesn't mean it may not be consistent with our strategy next year, the year after. So you have to just keep coming back and saying, is this still no longer consistent with your strategy, or is it now maybe it fits in with one of those asset classes strategies that I referred to. So you have to just continue to do that. I think that because new ideas, are needed. We after the 2008 financial crisis, our fund dropped to 60% funded status. And some experts say when you fall that low in terms of your funding level, you might as well go out of business. So we've survived that. And we're now, approaching 71%, and we'll see what this fiscal year does for us at the next end of this month. But you may have some ideas that help us to get to that 100% funding level, and that's our ultimate goal. As my colleagues have said, that our job is for the 2 million members, regardless of who elected me or who appointed the other board members. Our combined goal is to have a sustainable fund for our members that we're working every day for. So that's one of my suggestions to our investors out there, is to stay the course and keep trying, because one day it may be your time.
Thank you. Cynthia, 1 minute.
Well, I want to say that the old idea that you have to make a choice between ESG and ROI is antiquated. You can have both. And I hope the investors really see that. I also just want to say that, helping each other, the people of color, Latinos, and women in the field of finance is still small. So when we help each other, we all rise. And I believe that there's enough room and opportunity for all of us. So thank you so much for being a part of this amazing discussion.
Thank you, Cynthia. Ophelia.
It's just very quickly. I think I would urge people to stay involved with organizations like this. Hispanic Heritage Foundation with this forum makes a difference. The diverse, I think it's called Diverse Asset Manager Initiative. There are other groups like this, and learn as much as you can, talk to your colleagues, have opportunities to interact, and just sort of see how is the landscape changing. And ESG has definitely made a difference around this.
Thank you. Well, we are out of time. I want to thank Henry and Cynthia and Ophelia. I know how valuable your time is, and I know how busy you each are. And so thank you for carving out some time for us to share your thoughts, your insights, your best practices in your roles with these systems. I also want to thank Mr. Tijerino and Mr. Plaitez and HHF. This is such an important forum. It's such an important time to be having these conversations. We can't continue to make progress unless we continue to make this relevant and expand the conversation beyond our sort of subgroups. So thank you for bringing us together to do that. And again, thank you to HHF.